Ukraine just made itself impossible to abandon. For 3 years, this has been treated as a battlefield where victory depends on who fires the next shell or holds the next town. But that framing misses the fundamental shift in incentives. The real story is not about winning a war, but how Ukraine transformed into an unignorable strategic anchor that now dictates Russia's long-term collapse and rewrites Europe's security architecture forever. By watching this, you will understand why disengagement has become more costly than continued support for any major power involved. The transformation began with a shift in organizational design. For decades, conventional wisdom held that only large standing armies could withstand modern aggression. Ukraine proved the opposite by building what analysts call a whole-of-society resilience model. This is not just about morale or national pride. It functions as a distributed fault-tolerant architecture where government, military, and civil sectors integrate into a single system with no single point of failure. When traditional command structures face disruption from cyber attacks or physical destruction, the civilian sector absorbs those shocks instantly because they are already part of the operational loop. Consider how this works in practice. In a linear defense model, if you cut the supply line at one critical node, the entire front collapses. Ukraine replaced that fragile perimeter with a dynamic mesh network. Intelligence flows from local farmers spotting movements to commercial drone operators targeting artillery positions without waiting for bureaucratic approval chains. Logistics are decentralized across thousands of small distribution points rather than relying on massive depots that can be destroyed in single strikes. Because of this structure, the aggressor cannot achieve decisive breakthroughs by striking specific high-value targets. Every attempt to dismantle Ukraine's command and control simply pushes the system into a more resilient configuration. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. This organizational adaptability has forced Russia into an unsustainable resource drain. The cost of continued aggression now exceeds the cost of strategic abandonment for Moscow. For over 3 years, Russian forces have been locked in a war of attrition that they cannot win but must continue to fight because withdrawal would signal total regime failure domestically. The conflict has become a real-world laboratory demonstrating that technological innovation and organizational adaptability are defining characteristics of military effectiveness. Nations watching this development realize that future force architecture depends less on the size of their arsenals and more on how quickly they can integrate civilian capabilities into defense planning. The strategic implications extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. The country has effectively transitioned from a local battlefield to a permanent variable in Russia's geopolitical equation. Any attempt by Western powers to abandon this front would signal that sovereignty is negotiable. It would validate the Russian state media narrative claiming they are fighting a necessary war against hostile regimes, but it would also destroy the credibility of every security guarantee given across Europe for decades. The cost of disengagement rises with every day Ukraine holds its ground because each surviving hour proves that modern warfare requires societal integration to survive. Here is what most observers miss about this dynamic. While Russia propagates a counter-narrative claiming Ukraine has become impossible to abandon only due to alleged Nazification, the reality is far more structural and less ideological. The Russian state media frames the conflict as necessary destruction of a hostile regime rather than defense of sovereignty, but their own military failures prove that no amount of propaganda can fix the underlying mathematical problem of resource depletion against an adaptive opponent. The war acts as a blueprint for future force architecture because it demonstrates that organizational resilience is now more valuable than raw firepower. However, this unbreakable will faces significant headwinds. The exhaustion of the population and the sheer scale of frontline demands complicate the sustainability of this model over time. There are no independent data points on the long-term economic viability of keeping a whole society mobilized for years without external support. While Ukraine has successfully dictated the terms of Russia's strategic collapse, we cannot yet quantify the precise threshold where resilience transitions into permanent geopolitical dominance. The lack of post-conflict data represents a critical knowledge gap that policymakers must navigate carefully. The key insight lies in understanding how incentives have shifted permanently. Before this war, international security relied on deterrence through threat of force. Now it relies on interdependence created by shared survival risks. Ukraine has turned national survival into a global strategic imperative because the failure of one node threatens the entire network's credibility. If the West abandons Kyiv today, every subsequent conflict becomes more likely because the cost of aggression drops to near zero for potential aggressors elsewhere. The Ukrainian front is no longer just about territory. It is the baseline condition for modern European security architecture. This explains why major powers cannot simply walk away regardless of domestic political pressure or economic costs. The strategic anchor has been set so deep that pulling Ukraine loose would require dismantling the entire post-war order simultaneously. It creates a situation where continued support becomes more rational than disengagement, not because of moral obligation, but because of hard strategic calculus. The conflict serves as a warning to all potential aggressors that modern warfare demands total societal integration and that failing to account for this resilience leads to inevitable collapse. The war has established a new baseline for military effectiveness, where the cost of continued aggression exceeds the value of territorial gains. This is not temporary fatigue or political exhaustion. It is a structural shift in how states calculate risk and reward in an era of hybrid warfare. Ukraine has proven that a smaller state can dictate terms to a much larger aggressor by leveraging distributed resilience rather than traditional massed forces. The result is a frozen conflict that cannot be resolved through negotiation because the incentives for both sides have fundamentally changed. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.